This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Later today, the Connecticut State Senate will take up measures related to the governor's remaining executive powers in the pandemic. Among them, should the statewide mask mandate in schools expire at the end of the month? Governor Lamont thinks so. Coming up, we'll talk about the legislature's role and if the mandate ends, how local school districts will respond. We'll hear from superintendents and from Dr. Manisha Juthani, Commissioner of the State Department of Public Health. Her department is working on guidance for school districts. You can join us too. How do you want your child's school to handle masks in the months ahead? That number, 888-720-9677. 888-720-WNPR. Share a comment on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter at Where We Live. That conversation on the mask mandate coming up. First, while the school mask mandate has dominated the news related to the Connecticut General Assembly, we can't forget the new legislative session has begun. Chief on the to-do list for lawmakers and the governor is the state budget. And of course, there are topical bills that will come up before the session ends. But this is also a big election year for General Assembly seats and, of course, the gubernatorial race. So what can we really expect from the legislature this session? Joining us now on Zoom is Mark Pazniokas, Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
So much to talk about. Before we get into the vote coming up before the state Senate, let's talk about the session overall, Mark. And as I mentioned, it's an election year. You've been doing this for some time now, covering the state capitol and important races. What do you expect to see this session?
Well, the election certainly will color almost everything that the governor and the General Assembly does this year. That's just the nature of the beast. So the governor is framing his reelection really using the budget proposal and some other initiatives. The Republicans, the minority party that has been struggling since the election of President Trump in 2016, the Republicans had a pretty good string of picking up seats from a low point in 2008. But that all ended in 2018, where when the Democrats were really energized 2 years into the Trump administration. And so the Republicans are trying to capitalize on a couple of issues. One is crime. The sweeping police accountability bill that was passed in response to the George Floyd killing by police in Minneapolis is something that the Republicans want to revisit, as well as the spike we've seen in car thefts, particularly those committed by juveniles. Again, there is an effort on the Republican side to re-examine some of the reforms about how we treat juveniles in the criminal justice system.
This is also a short session. So when we think about the dynamic between especially lawmakers who want to propose particular bills, what can really get accomplished in these short few months?
Well, you're right. The short session is supposed to be focused on fiscal issues. The rules are a little different in the short session. For a legislator to propose a bill, you really have to do it through a committee. The term of art is, the committee has to raise a bill. So that does limit the volume of bills. You need to start with at least a consensus that it's something they should take up. It doesn't mean there is a consensus that it's going to pass. But yes, it is a different animal than it is in the odd number years when it's a 5-month session.
I believe, was it last week where the legislature's conservative caucus actually came out with their priorities. And number one on the list was to require photo IDs to vote. Really, Mark, in Connecticut?
That is an issue that keeps coming back. And it was very unlikely that will get through even the committee that handles electoral legislation, much less the Democratic-controlled General Assembly. It's something that is taking on great symbolic value. But the bottom line is fraud at the polls, the idea of somebody showing up and impersonating somebody, is incredibly rare. In fact, I have not found a case in Connecticut. So, voter fraud does exist. It usually happens with absentee ballots in small numbers. Again, the former president of the United States, when he talks about sweeping voter fraud, there's really no evidence of that. And in fact, if you think about how elections are conducted in the United States, you would realize it's almost impossible because there is no one election. In Connecticut, there are 169 elections that are conducted because they are handled at the local level. So the idea of being able to scale up some kind of voter fraud is really a myth. But again, it doesn't mean that you can't make improvements, that you can't do a better job of cleaning up the voter rolls to make sure that they are up to date. But photo ID, again, has just become kind of a lightning rod. Conservatives love it. Because again, on its face, for most of us who have driver's licenses or photo IDs, it's not that big a deal. But there are people who don't have driver's licenses. There are older folks who don't have family support and would have trouble going to the DMV and getting some kind of government photo ID. But again, it seems to be a solution in search of a problem that so far has not been identified as real in the state of Connecticut.
Before we talk about COVID measures, again, the state Senate voting today on a limited state of emergency. I just wanted to get your response, what you've heard, the response to Governor Lamont's budget proposal in this election year and how that will shake out. Mark.
Well, the pushback that Lamont is facing from his own party is really from the progressive wing. The governor has been reluctant to look at a more progressive tax structure. There is tax relief in his budget. There are tax credits on the property tax. There are some other breaks, but there's no sweeping change here. And, this is a tension that has been present since he was elected in 2018. There are people who would like to see a more progressive tax structure, that higher taxes on the very high earners in Connecticut, in part to offset some of the advantages that the very rich have under the federal tax code. But this governor, and quite frankly, as was the case with the previous Democratic governor, Dan Malloy, there is a reluctance to do anything that takes away the competitive advantage that Connecticut has over New York and New Jersey in particular. Connecticut is a high expense state. It's a high tax state, but it's still cheaper than New York. And governors of Connecticut like to maintain that advantage.
I know that there have been proposals, especially from state Republicans, to do something about the sales tax. Do you think that will have any weight this session as lawmakers discuss, what should make it before May 4th?
It's difficult to make substantive changes because it's a broad-based tax and the numbers get very big. You can exempt certain things from the sales tax, but those debates tend to be difficult because once you start that conversation, the question is, well, why should dry cleaning be exempt, but buying clothes or not? So those debates tend to be very careful for that reason.
You're hearing Mark Pazniokas here on Where We Live, Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror, as we talk about this new legislative session already underway. You can join us if you have a question, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. A lot of attention with what's going to happen with the mask mandate in schools. As I mentioned, Mark, the Senate now also voting today on specific COVID measures, including limiting a state of emergency that would keep the state eligible for federal relief, and continuing some of the governor's executive orders, including that school-wide mask mandate until the end of the month. So let's just break that down. What the House voted on Friday, what the Senate is expected to vote on today, and how this will impact the local school districts.
So the Senate today will vote on two measures. One is a resolution that will declare a new state of emergency, more limited than the one that the governor declared in March of 2020, which gave him incredible powers, really literally the ability to unilaterally enact, temporarily at least, new laws and to suspend existing ones. That is an incredible authority. Nobody questions that. The new declaration, which would run through June 30th, is more limited, and it is intended to, again, guarantee that the state does not jeopardize the federal relief that is flowing to the state. The administration says that's been amounting to about $30 million a month. It comes in extended SNAP benefits and stuff like that. And the argument is, why do we want to risk losing it? There are also 11 executive orders of the 200 to 300 that were issued during the first 2 years of this pandemic. And they are a mix of things that are really not controversial. In fact, things that some people like, the idea of the authorization to do telemedicine, that kind of stuff. There's waivers of purchasing requirements to really cut through the red tape to allow the state to move quickly on purchasing masks, vaccines, and the like. But then there's a handful that deal with masks and vaccinations. And that's what has become very, very controversial, even though we're really talking about a limited amount of time on really any of this. Most of the executive orders would be extended only until the middle of April. So there's a lot of angst over really a short period of time. The mask mandate is the one that there's no clear, safe political position to take, because there are people who are complaining on both sides of that question. You certainly have many parents who are frustrated, who believe that based on the statistics that, pediatric COVID fatalities are very rare. They do happen. There are more than 1,000 children who have died of COVID in the United States, but that is, less than 0.25% of all the cases. But there are people who would like to see the mask mandate continue, particularly for the youngest children in daycares, because there's no vaccine yet approved for people under 5. On the other hand, it's just, Vinnie Candelora, the House Republican leader, I think he phrased it pretty succinctly and pretty smartly. And he talked about the psychological aspect of this. A lot of people are just tired. They're frustrated. They're ready to move on. And you see blue state governors who have been kind of the strictest on some of the orders that they have enacted. Almost universally, they're all backing away from mandates for masks and to a degree vaccinations. Because in Connecticut, the vaccination mandates really are limited to state employees. That's going away. And to visit people in nursing homes, you have to show evidence of vaccination or take a test on the spot. And that's going to go away in early March, the first week of March.
That's an important point that you brought up, that you have blue state governors like Governor Lamont and, saying that, now's the time to get rid of this or eliminate the mask mandate in schools. But really, this is out of sync with federal guidance, Mark, including, again, the CDC recommending universal indoor masking by all students ages 2 and older, staff, teachers, visitors to K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status. It's just interesting to see that this conversation is moving ahead before the CDC puts out guidance on this, because that's something that has been relied on for so many months.
The CDC is under a lot of fire. They have issued guidance that has been confusing at times. They are out of step with the World Health Organization and many other nations on those recommendations. Over the weekend, I noticed that Dr. Scott Gottlieb, the former FDA director, who is one of the governor's informal advisors, said that he expects the CDC to revise that guidance. Right now, the CDC has a guidance that applies to the entire country. And the question is that mandate still necessary in states like Connecticut in the Northeast, where cases went up very quickly and they have come down very quickly? But yes, there is the science, or at least the scientists, there is not a consensus, the CDC versus the World Health Organization, for example.
Getting back to the emergency orders, executive orders that the state Senate will consider, when we talk about the mask mandate, that would permit the mask mandate to continue through February 28th. And then after that, depending on the Senate vote, it would be up to local districts to decide what to do, Mark.
Yeah, and that's been a difficult question. Is the governor really foisting onto the local school boards what has been a state mandate? The governor early on was very clear that he was going to take the heat. He did not want to see local school boards come under siege by angry parents. But he's ready to do exactly that with this proposal now. The governor did give over authority to mayors and first selectmen on the question of what requiring a mask to go to the grocery store and whatnot. But he did keep that power in his office when it came to schools. And that's one of the criticisms against this decision. Should there be a statewide mandate, or should communities be able to look at what's going on in their communities and make a local decision? On its face, that's a reasonable thing. But the political reality is, as I'm sure Fran Rabinowitz is going to say when she comes on later, is this is very difficult for local school boards and school superintendents.
Again, you've been hearing Mark Pazniokas here on Where We Live, Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror, to further drive home that this is a political conversation and how that there's pressure on lawmakers and school leaders to make decisions based on what their constituents want. You're expecting to see protesters today at the state capitol with the state Senate vote coming up, Mark?
Yes, and the Capitol Police are certainly expecting them. They do have fencing out as a precaution. They tend to err on the side of caution ever since the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. I got here early and there was nobody out there. So after I get off the air with you, I'm going to take a walk outside and see who's around. It's kind of a chilly morning here outside the state capitol.
Well, thank you for the context you provided us, Mark. Again, Mark Pazniokas, Capitol Bureau Chief for the Connecticut Mirror. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you, Lucy.
You're listening to Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. Coming up, we're going to hear from school district leaders. And later, Dr. Manisha Juthani, the Commissioner of the State Department of Public Health. What questions do you have about the mask mandate in schools? How do you want your child's school to handle the issue of masks in the months ahead? You can join us 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Are you confused about the mask mandate in schools and how the issue will be handled for the remaining school year? Melissa tweeted, I really wish we'd wait to remove the requirement until everyone is eligible for vaccination. A lot of school-aged kids have younger siblings at home who are still ineligible, including mine. Why not wait till everyone has the option to be protected? And HK tweeted, "The mask mandate needs to end in all schools. Connecticut is one of the last states to continue to mandate this in school. Masks should be a choice, and there are free N95 masks available if a parent still wants their child to wear one." So we wanted to hear from how school leaders are handling this moment. Joining us now on Zoom, first is Fran Rabinowitz. She's Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. Fran, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning and happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. Our listeners can join 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So it's, I think when we ask people about the last couple of years, it feels like a long time. Sometimes it feels like we've been doing this for 3 years. But just to put a finer point on the mask mandate in schools, this will be the first time schools will be in person during the pandemic without a statewide mask mandate, depending on how the General Assembly votes. And so how are school leaders weighing this moment, Fran?
Well, I think this is a very difficult and challenging time for school leaders. I would say that depending upon the community, it can be somewhat smooth transition, but in most communities, I think you will see conflict about whether to continue the masks or not continue them. And in speaking with superintendents, it is not an easy time to be a superintendent, or in this particular case, to be a board member.
When you talk about the pressure that educators and administrators are under, talk through with us when it comes time to make the decision how you're also expected to deliver public health information, and what guidance do you expect to hear from the state? Because that's still forthcoming.
Well, here's the thing, which I stated on the governor's press conference, and I say it over and over again. Superintendents and board members are not epidemiologists. We're not even medical doctors. And so we're educators. If you want to ask us how to teach reading, we can do that. But we absolutely need the medical guidance in order to make the best decision for our students and staff. And so we're awaiting that guidance from the Department of Health, which we hope will be coming this week. That will make life, if the guidance is specific and to, what are the factors that you should be looking for in your community. And if it has some metrics, it will be much easier to recommend the change.
And depending on how the General Assembly votes, again, the State Department of Public Health would have the authority to reinstate a mask mandate in the future if things started to look, with the surge continuing. How do you feel about that?
I do feel I feel very comfortable about that. I mean, right now, the House has said up until June of 2022, the DPH can issue whatever mandates they feel are necessary. And that's comforting to know that we have that ability if there is another surge or if there is a reason that we feel those masks need to go back on for everyone.
We're hearing that some school districts, no matter if this statewide mask mandate in schools expires February 28th, they're still going to require masks in indoor public places. In the city of New Haven is an example. And so this just shows how varied the response will be, Fran, depending on the community.
It is so dependent upon the community. I mean, I'm hearing New Haven, I'm hearing Bridgeport, and I think what they're looking at there is certainly the vaccination rate in the community, the vaccination rate in the schools, et cetera, the prevalence rate, the hospitalizations, all of those things are pointing to the need to continue the masks. And I respect the right of every community to be able to do that. And I think that's really incredibly important. Although I still wish, honestly, that it could somehow have been a state mandate in either way. But I'm thinking perhaps that wasn't possible because of the different rates in different communities.
You're hearing Fran Rabinowitz here on Where We Live. She's Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. We wanted to hear from another school district and how they're weighing this decision. So joining us now is Dr. Matt Conway, who's Superintendent of Derby Public Schools. Welcome to our show, Dr. Conway.
Thank you very much, and happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
So tell us, where do things stand with Derby? What have you been hearing from parents and teachers?
So we began meeting with teachers last week and our admins, and just yesterday held two different Zooms back-to-back, one for all staff and one for all families, kind of as we billed it as a pre-Super Bowl party Zoom to discuss mask wearing and have some conversations and fun around the topic leading into the Super Bowl. So it gave parents and staff an opportunity to really share their thoughts and experience over the past 2 years with regards to the mask wearing and where they might be in a couple of weeks from now as we contemplate where we will be as a community. So as Fran has mentioned, and you've heard from others, I'm sure that it really is a community-based decision that will come out of this, but I think providing opportunity for that access and voice for everyone to have to share their thoughts and experiences is critical to the process.
You mentioned that Zoom meeting and having fun, but for some listening, this issue is very stressful. Others are frustrated. And so tell me a little bit more about what you're hearing from parents and teachers at that meeting and how you're going to move forward after February 28th.
Sure. So we're hearing things on both sides that those from our teachers and staff that they find that the masks have impeded learning for students, especially with regards to speech and language skill development. They feel that students are showing a lack of confidence as a result in their work as a result of the mask wearing. But at the same time, there are some that wonder, is, now the right time, but we're not sure, and neither are they, and they're sharing that openly. And from parents, we're hearing that now's the time to remove, but we're hearing from others that they want the vaccination rate amongst our youngest population to be a little bit higher. So we're hearing it from both sides. We're sharing out articles and studies from a variety of resources and asking people to also share what they might come across for articles and studies as well in that same document. So everybody is kind of sharing the information together and having an opportunity to discuss it openly in a respectful way.
Are you confident about this transition, Dr. Conway?
I'm 100% confident about the transition. We can't be anything but. The House has voted. The Senate will vote today. Depending upon the outcome of that, we have to be prepared to move forward to the next steps, whether we think it should be a statewide mandate or not. Either way, we're in a position where we have to prepare to move forward.
Mm. And so do you feel like you and the school board are in the hot seat here because, this conversation about masks has become so political, and because you mentioned there are different sides to this issue? I'm just wondering if you can talk more about, the decision-making process and how, you're talking with the school board and others about moving forward.
I think the best we can do in this is give everybody an opportunity to share their thoughts and experiences. And at the end of the day, if a decision is different than what the state is currently recommending will happen on February 28th, then that will determine whether there's any action locally or not. If we're just going to basically move forward with the decision from the legislature and DPH to lift the mandate, then so be it. If there's a different decision where it's going to be a local mandate, then that's something each board will have the opportunity to take up.
And so depending again on that vote, the school district of Derby will have to decide if what is best for their community, and that could also just mean, would it be a mask optional policy moving forward?
Well, it's not necessary, and that's up to the local school district. But if this legislature is lifting the mandate as of a certain date, it becomes optional after that. There's nothing a local board has to do that will already have been done by the legislature. It's only in the event that you're doing something different that might require a local board decision, though local boards can, if they so see fit, also adopt an optional policy if that's what they want to do.
Fran Rabinowitz, can you respond to that? Because I believe there have been some districts that are school boards that are voting on a mask optional policy.
Yes, many school districts have surveyed parents and are already voting on a mask optional policy for their particular district. But as Matt said, the legislature, if the Senate votes today, then the legislature is in fact removing the mask mandate. And then districts just feel the need to also emphasize to parents that it is optional. And I think the far majority of districts will probably take that option. That's what I'm hearing, at least, depending, again, Lucy, on what the Department of Public Health issues as guidance. I think that has to be really kept in the foreground, because that's where we have been led over the last 2 years by the Department of Public Health, and I think they've done a good job of it. And we're going to listen again as we cross this bridge.
Right. Dr. Conway, I wanted to go back to you again. Dr. Matt Conway is here, Superintendent of Derby Public Schools. And so, a lot waiting on this vote by the state Senate. It's expected that this mask mandate in schools will expire at the end of the month, and local districts will be then able to make decisions based on their local community. But are you anticipating any confusion? Because when we look at what the CDC has put out there, including there's a federal mandate that masks must be worn on buses, and how that will be confusing to your school community, where masks may be optional in school, but they'll be required on buses. Is that your understanding?
That actually is what is in place right now. As of Thursday's reports from conversations on Wednesday, Dr. Walensky has stated that they will be reviewing their guidance as well. But right now, on any public transportation, it is mandated. We have had those conversations with staff and parents in our Zooms yesterday that would still be a requirement. So that's a communication item. It might be confusing to people, but it's communicating out that on buses, any public transportation like that, whether it's to and from school, whether it's a field trip, whether it's a athletic program, that while on the buses, they will have to wear a mask.
Fran, did you want to respond to that as well?
I'm sorry, Lucy, can you repeat that?
Well, just the fact that depending on, no matter how Connecticut moves forward on this mask mandate, so if the mask mandate in schools expires, right now there is still a federal mandate that masks must still be worn on public transportation, including school buses. Has that been communicated clearly to school communities?
Well, I certainly have communicated that through our attorney to all of the superintendents, saying this is a federal mandate. And do I believe that there will be some confusion on that? Absolutely. It's hard to, families group school together. That's the busing, everything.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's going to be, you have to wear your mask on the buses. I can imagine little kids, where's my mask? It's in my backpack. Let me pull it out to put it on to get on the bus. I think it will require certainly an extra step and some confusion on the part of families.
You've been hearing Fran Rabinowitz here on Where We Live, Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. Fran, thank you for your time today.
You're welcome, Lucy, anytime.
Also with us was Dr. Matt Conway, Superintendent of Derby Public Schools. We thank you for your time as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. So after the break, the Commissioner of the State Department of Public Health joins us, Dr. Manisha Juthani. What questions do you have for her related to the mask mandate in schools? Again, you can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We've been talking about the mask mandate in schools as lawmakers vote on COVID measures in the state Senate later today. The plan is contingent on the approval by the General Assembly to extend an executive order that lets the Public Health Commissioner mandate masks in certain settings after February 28th. Joining us now on the phone is the Commissioner of the Department of Public Health, Dr. Manisha Juthani. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Lucy.
So we're getting a lot of questions from parents and others where some are asking, why now? Why remove this mask mandate in schools now? Others are saying it's about time. So just remind us why you as Public Health Commissioner and the governor believe the statewide mask mandate in schools should be eliminated by the end of the month.
So I think we've seen a major difference now than where we were 2 years ago in terms of how we have managed this pandemic. First of all school-age children are eligible for vaccinations, which is our number one way to mitigate against this pandemic. Secondly, even though we did have a new variant that came on the scene, we are seeing continued decreases in case counts, in hospitalizations. And so the combination of the two and the fact that most schools are having some vacation period around President's Day weekend, and we have, another several days, about a week, to wash out that period before schools can go to mask choice, should that be what their school boards decide, that this is an opportunity to take advantage of what we are hoping will be continued and sustained decreases in cases in our community. And as we hope that this virus becomes more of a seasonal virus that we see going forward.
This is not in lockstep with the federal guidance, what the CDC recommends with universal indoor masking by all. Do you think that is problematic? It causes confusion within our population about what is the best decision?
So we know we've seen guidance from the CDC at various different times, but every state is different. And the CDC's role is really to be able to provide guidance to all states in the country. And what we know is that all our states are very, very different. So this guidance is very appropriate and meaningful. However, not all states are vaccinated to the same degree that our state is. And so I think this is what we need to keep in mind as we're going forward. Not all places have cases decreasing at the same level that ours is. And I do think we are at a point now where some schools may say that their vaccination rate is so low and they are concerned about the degree of transmission in their community that they want to keep masks in place as a requirement. And what we're really offering different school districts is the opportunity to weigh in at this point, because we know that one of the biggest mitigation measures we have in terms of vaccination is something that people have in control in their hands.
When we talk about giving them guidance, when is that expected that school districts will have that from your department? And when we talk about metrics, what metrics should they use?
So I think there are two different things there I want to address. First of all, we are working hard at this guidance and hope to have it out shortly to be able to primarily provide schools with guidance on how to deal with isolation, with quarantine that they've been dealing with for the last several years. Because we are going into a different setting now where masks, which are one of our major mitigation strategies, will not be required. That does not mean that a family may not choose to continue to tell their child to mask. It's going to be mask choice for those schools that choose not to have universal masking. And so our guidance will be able to help people navigate how to operationalize those different strategies that we've used so far. In terms of metrics, I think one of the things I've tried to be very clear about throughout this pandemic, particularly in these last several months, is that the virus has changed, the situation on the ground has changed. So first of all, we do know we have vaccinations. Secondly, we know that the Omicron variant, in terms of test positivity rate, varies in terms of what the severity of that virus may mean versus the Delta variant, particularly in somebody who's vaccinated. So that also makes a difference. And so when we look at case counts, when we look at hospitalizations, we see that there is a major difference. We had far fewer hospitalizations, even though we had a lot. We had close to the same amount as we did at the beginning of the pandemic, but far fewer than we did relative to the number of cases that we had in our state. And that just speaks to a less virulent virus that we have now on the ground. Now, what we're also seeing is that the days are getting longer. We are having warmer weather, emerging. And my hope is that we will continue to see a continued decline so that schools can make choices that are going to work best for them.
You said that that's your hope, but as we all know, you especially, since this pandemic started, the situation on the ground can change from month to month. Just look at what happened last summer with Delta. And so talk more about how depending again on this vote by the General Assembly, the State Senate voting today, your department would still have the authority to reinstate this mask mandate in schools depending on the situation on the ground. So what would that metric be?
I think the biggest metric that we would be looking at there is a sustained increase in hospitalizations that would get to the point where we have real concerns, whether our healthcare system can actually bear what they have been dealing with for 2 years now. And so I think as we think about what would be required to institute a statewide mask mandate in schools, that would probably be the number one threshold. Now, having said that, schools may choose, if they can't keep their doors open, because based on the situation in their particular school and with vaccination rates in their particular school, that going back to full mask mandate is the way to keep the doors open. We are now allowing different schools the opportunity to weigh in on that, as opposed to just mandating it at the level of the state. So I think there are two different issues. Yes, you're absolutely right. We will still have, if the Senate passes this, the ability to reinstitute something should it get to the point of public health concern for the entire state. But I do think that schools should remember that they have this ability all on their own to be able to make those decisions quickly, to be able to try to keep children in school, which I think is our number one priority.
Kathy tweeted, when will there be some recognition of the needs of students and teachers who are high risk or have family members who are? What happened to protecting the most vulnerable? As Kathy writes, is that concept just words? How do you respond to what Kathy shared? We also hear from other immunocompromised residents in our state that are concerned about this decision now.
So I totally understand that perspective, and I do think we need to continue to take care of our most immunocompromised. And that's why I think we need to have people recognize that they can vaccinate their children. We have done our best in all the months that the vaccinations for children have been around to try to bring people on board. And I would continue to remind people that they have this opportunity to be able to protect those that are most vulnerable. Now, what I would say is that our teachers, those that are vulnerable, obviously can continue to mask. The reason that we are offering this as an opportunity for people to weigh in is that there are multiple different public health challenges that we are faced with. For 2 years, we are focusing on taking care of our community at large and our most vulnerable. We also have people that have concerns about the longer-term impact of masking, which I do think, relatively speaking, in the grand context of things, is minimal. I think the benefits of masking do outweigh those risks, but I do think that our children have been in masks for a long time and that communities should take care of their most immunocompromised, and getting vaccinations is really the number one way that we can do that.
When we talk about protection, Melissa, we read a tweet from Melissa earlier about, a lot of school-aged kids have younger siblings at home who are still ineligible, including hers. And so, again, why not wait until everyone has the option to be protected? We know that the vaccine for children under 5 is still not ready.
So in this regard, I do really feel for the parents who have children who are still in this age group where we don't have a vaccine. And I'm very hopeful that Pfizer, who has told us that we may be able to review this in April, that, coming into this spring, we will have an opportunity to get the youngest children vaccinated. And I hope a lot of parents do sign up for that once we have the data to support that. I think what we're seeing now, though, is that we have large swaths of our society who are immunized, and we have continued decreasing rates as the days are getting longer and as our ability to protect people with vaccinations has continued to rise, and as the weather is improving. So if there's an opportunity as we are approaching spring, this is going to be a time when I cannot promise what's going to come forward because we have not had schools unmasked yet. However, the best science we have, the best information we have is that this is a time when at least our local leaders should be able to have an opportunity to weigh in on what is going to work best for their community, because each of our communities in Connecticut is a little different.
You're an infectious disease specialist before you, again, became commissioner of the State Department of Public Health. Has this been a hard decision to make, given how we've seen the pandemic go up and down, concerns about, there's a lot of political pressure, some community members being very vocal about this mask mandate needing to end. Has this been a difficult decision for you to reach?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, as an infectious disease doctor, as a physician, I think there are multiple factors that go into this type of decision making. And I would continue to advise people to make assessments that are going to work best for you and work best for your family, and continue to look at what the conditions on the ground are and make choices that are going to work well for you. I think at the end of the day, my job, as I see it, is to try to give the best public health advice. And, if rates right now are continuing to decrease, but if masks don't bother you, to wear them in indoor settings is certainly the most additional layer of protection that we can offer. Now, if you choose for your family that is not something, because you are vaccinated and boosted and your overall risk is substantially lower, and you have the ability to make that choice, then I would say that is something that you can consider. But what I will say for our community at large is that, again, I am hopeful, cannot promise, but I am hopeful that we are getting to a point where this pandemic will recede a bit. And I'm hopeful that we will have what I'm hoping is a 6 months of reprieve a little bit, as opposed to getting a Delta wave in the middle of the summer like we did last year. But that is my hope. I cannot promise that's what's going to happen.
And Dr. Juthani,
I hope that we don't.
We're almost out of time. I want to thank you, Dr. Manisha Juthani, Commissioner of the State Department of Public Health. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Katie Pellico. We'll be back tomorrow.